Welcome to Forensic Perspectives, the legal community's online resource for the latest in forensic accounting, business valuation, and financial litigation support. Your host for this podcast is Mark Gottlieb. In addition to being a certified public accountant, Mark has also obtained many professional accreditations in forensic accounting and business valuation. As one of the Tri-State's leading financial experts, Mark is also a frequent lecturer and writer. Without any further ado, please welcome the host of Forensic Perspectives, Mark Gottlieb.
Thank you, and welcome to today's program. My guest today is Sherri Donovan of Sherri Donovan and Associates PC. Since the inception of her law firm in 1988, Sherri's practice is concentrated on all areas of matrimonial and family law. She is a seasoned litigator, negotiator, politician, and a sought-after writer and lecturer. Sherri is also the author of Hit 'em Where It Hurts, The Take No Prisoner's Guide to Divorce, a comprehensive book on divorce. Sherri, welcome, and thank you for appearing on Forensic Perspectives.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Sherri, the economic downturn that we are currently experiencing has affected many aspects of family and matrimonial law. For those couples that are seriously considering divorce, what options do you think they should consider when discussing the financial situation of this decision?
There are many options for families today. The economic downturn, as well as modern life, has brought about a lot of stress for the modern family. In addition, because people live longer, there are many options. People aren't just in one marriage anymore. So these are the various options. There are options for divorce. There are options for legal separation agreements. There are options for parenting agreements. There are options for postnuptial agreements, as well as prenuptials on future marriages. With the economic downturn, there are many financial issues to consider. There's issues of income. There's issues of bonuses and stock options, whether those are cyclical and be considered as income or if they're one-time shots. There's issues about change in employment. And there's also issues about change in investments. And therefore, there's a change in the property division between the husband and the wife.
Well, Sherri, I know that you had recently sent out a newsletter entitled Divorce in Hard Economic Times, and you listed a couple of categories or considerations that people that are divorcing should consider. Let's go through some of those components that you had discussed in your newsletter. The first one being the modification of child support or spousal maintenance. First of all, can you tell our audience how is child support and spousal maintenance determined? And then, once we've defined it, can you tell us how the current economic situation is affecting those calculations?
Absolutely, Mark. Child support is a little easier to discern because there is a formula for child support. There is something called the Child Support Standards Act, where they look at income of both parties, but particularly the one who will be paying the child support. If you wanted a shorthand, in New York City, they deduct 10% for FICA and local tax. If you live outside New York City, you look at what the local tax is and what the FICA is, the Social Security. You deduct that from the gross income. And then, if you have one child, that's 17% of that income. If you have two children, it's 25%. If you have three children, it's 29%. That's your basic child support. In addition, you may be asked to pay a pro rata share of your income on items such as education, medical, and child care. Maintenance or alimony, also called spousal support, is much more difficult for me to advise you how much. There is no set formula for maintenance. Therefore, the judges look at a variety of factors. They look at the difference between income of the parties, they look at contributions to the marriage, and they look at what the total financial pot is, and what the needs are for someone to get the education to be able to work steadily. Now, that's the basic formulas. How the economic downturn affects those areas is quite extensive. For those who have recent unemployment or a modification, a downward modification in their bonuses or a downward modification in their income, they may need to lower the child support. And that's difficult to do. The judges don't like to do it. But if you can show through no fault of your own that you've had a significant change in circumstances and a downward turn in your income, they will lower the support, either permanently or temporarily at least.
So are you saying that under the current economic situation, child support and spousal maintenance is not written in stone?
Under these type of circumstances, they can always be modified. It's difficult to modify, and you must have all your backup and documentation. If you're unemployed, they want to see your job attempts. They will not take this lightly, but they will look at it. In addition, it also may affect, because let's say a homemaker who has been home now wants to re-enter the workforce, and let's say the spouse or the courts are saying, look, after divorce, you have to work. But there are so many unemployed people that it may take that spouse who's been the homemaker longer to enter the workforce, or more education, or some type of special skill. And therefore, the maintenance that's needed may be more so than in good economic times.
What about the issue of bankruptcy? In general terms, can bankruptcy eliminate the obligation for child support or spousal maintenance?
No. In bankruptcy, spousal support and child support are non-dischargeable debts, which means that the bankruptcy court won't wipe out those debts. They do look to protect children and the spouses in terms of the obligations of maintenance and child support. In fact, child support is given one of the highest priorities in bankruptcy actions. On the other hand, property division, they may discharge. There's certain types of bankruptcy actions where they may discharge that obligation.
And when you're talking about property division, are you really referring to the equitable distribution of assets that were distributed during the divorce situation?
Yes. When you get divorced, they look to wind up the financial affairs, and they will look to see what are all the assets and what are all the debts and how they should be divided. By the way, it's not an automatic 50-50 in New York State. Equitable distribution, they don't have to divide it 50-50, although in many long-term marriages they do. So they do look to identify all the assets and debts, classify them as marital or separate, evaluate them, put a price tag on them, and then you should look also to tax impact those assets.
You know, in general terms, when we as forensic accountants are retained to work on a matrimonial matter, we're often asked to do an asset tracing exercise. And the purpose of that exercise is to try to determine if there were assets that were previously held by one or both spouses, and before or right after the commencement date of the divorce action, these assets were transferred and they may not be obtainable now, or even they are obtainable but they're in a different name. Do you find now that there's a greater tendency for this need, and have you found in divorce cases currently, when there is such an economic turmoil now, do you find that in more instances this happening?
Yes, I call it the shell game. I think the desperation in hard economic times leads people to more creative financing or more devious financing. So what's happening basically is, and I have examples in my cases I've recently been to court on. I had a case where one spouse who always paid the mortgage purposely let the mortgage go into foreclosure and not disclose where that money went to. I have other cases where one spouse is taking out the home equity line and has not disclosed to the other spouse where that money is going. And therefore, in the divorce, we have more need for discovery, disclosure of assets, and accountability. There are also third parties involved, and transfers are being made to third parties. And all of that could be considered dissipation of assets if it's not disclosed and it's not accounted for marital expenses.
Okay, what about salary, bonuses, and even capital gains and losses from assets that are held either in the marital pot or even recorded as separate property? Let's talk about salaries first. When you talk about the determination of income for the purposes of child support and spousal maintenance, you were going through the mechanics of how the court and how the profession addresses that computation. But that's based upon an annual amount, not necessarily an amount per month. Is that correct?
Yes, they look at the annual amount. If the amount changes each month, they will do averaging.
Okay, but right now, for instance, people are earning a certain amount of money, particularly those people that are in the finance field, and they get a bonus at the end of the year, and that bonus may triple or quadruple their annual income. What effect has this whole effort to determine what someone's income truly is, what effect does this have on the economic turmoil that we're seeing now?
Basically, what has to happen is with the bonuses, you look to see if they're cyclical, if there's a pattern of bonuses being provided each year in similar amounts. Now, with this economy, things go haywire. So where there normally may have been a bonus of a certain amount each year, then maybe last year that bonus was halved, and maybe there's no guarantee for a bonus in the future. The bonus for this year still has to be counted as income for child support purposes. The issue in divorce becomes, does the bonus in the future count as income? And therefore, let's say if there's a maintenance question or child support in the future, or is it a one-time bonus, or are there changes to the company that you can show where that bonus may not be given as in the past? Then it may be considered as a one-time asset.
Well, let's talk about one-time flows of cash coming in. Capital gains is a perfect example of that. If there's a portfolio and it has a fair market value of $1 million and they sell a portion of it, they have the capital gain or loss from that portfolio, but that's not going to repeat again unless they develop, again, another portfolio. So how do you address this issue with the capital gains?
Basically, if there's a history or pattern of cashing in stock each year so that there's similar capital gains each year, then you may be able to determine it as reoccurring income. But usually what's the case is they got stuck for finances and they cashed in some assets. And that is a one-time capital gains. And therefore, that would be treated as a one-time asset, not something with income, those stocks.
You often write about the effects of the finances in a divorce in relation to the caring of children. In fact, if I can quote you, you wrote in one of your books, the greatest tragedy of divorce is its effect on children. What do you think the current economic climate is going to do in regards to the modification, if any, on obligations for child support?
I think that both parents have to realize whether they stay together or get divorced, that their first obligation is to these children. A lot of parents move on. They create a second family. And I think with these economic times, and parents will say, well, I have a right to move on. She wanted the divorce or he wanted the divorce and I want to move on and start a second family. That's fine. But remember your financial obligation to your first children. And that has to be met. And you also have a strong obligation that if you do have a change in your employment, to find substitute employment or start doing long-term planning for your children, the 529B accounts for college, and look at other options. The children should not suffer even in hard economic times. They should be met first.